Hey guys, so tonight we're talking about revolutions of 1848. So this is going along with changes in politics in Europe at this period of time. So you can see our SOL below if you want to read it in more detail, but let's go ahead and get started on our PowerPoint. So first, causes of these liberal revolutions. So during 1848, there are quite a few liberal revolutions that take place, and they all are based in the same set of causes. So let's talk about those first. One, liberalism. That kind of makes sense since they're liberal revolutions. Remember from last night's video that liberals wanted freedom for people, specifically economic and political freedom, freedom to make choices. They wanted to give more power to elected officials and to parliaments, and they were typically middle class, so merchants and business owners. So that's liberalism. So from these liberal ideas, this idea of universal male suffrage emerges. You see this particularly in France. Universal male suffrage just means that all men would have the right to vote. So think in the United States, you usually hear the suffrage movement and you associate it with women's right to vote. Well, this is universal male suffrage, so all men have the right to vote. Next is nationalism. So nationalism, again, from last night's video, is a belief that people should be loyal to their nation or people with the same cultural and history or same culture and history and background and heritage as them, not loyal to monarchs or governments. So loyal to one's nation. This is seen especially in Greece during this time. In 1827, there is a revolution in Greece where the Greeks, those people who have the same cultural background, are fighting against the Ottomans who are ruling or in in Greece at the time. And the British and the French and the Russians all actually come to aid the Greeks, and not really because they support their movement to free themselves because of nationalism, but because they want to weaken the Ottoman Empire, and the Ottoman Empire are the ones who are the Greeks are fighting against. So they support the Greeks just simply to weaken the Ottoman Empire. That is why they support them. But for the Greeks, it's important because it's a nationalist movement. Think back to the painting we looked at when we were talking about the changing styles in art during what number unit was it? Unit 6. And we looked at the Battle of Chios. Remember, that was the Greeks fighting against the Ottoman. So just tying that back into one of our previous units. Next is economics. Remember, that was one of the main tenets of liberalism was they wanted freedom within economics and politics. So economics and politics always go hand in hand, and this is the same case here. So they wanted free trade. Remember again that liberals are typically businessmen or merchants. So if their push for free trade makes sense, they would want to open up more possibilities for them to make more money, and this happens when it's easier to trade goods. And again, politics. So that's the last cause of these liberal revolutions, so changing ideas in politics. So you see Republicans and Democrats emerge at this time. Republicans, when we're talking about it during this time period, were wealthy landowners typically. They wanted to see elected officials running government, but they believed that in order to vote for these officials, you needed to have land or at least wealth requirements, meet land ownership or wealth requirements in order for these men to have the right to vote. Democrats believed, or radicals also as they're called, believed in universal male suffrage. Again, every man should have the right to vote no matter how much land he owns or how much wealth he has. So these are some causes of these liberal revolutions. Let's go ahead and jump in and start looking at some of them. So France is the first one we're going to talk about. So during this period of time, mid-1800s, Louis Philippe is the constitutional monarch in France. But the people become unhappy with him, so they overthrow him in 1848, and they establish the Second Republic in France. But almost immediately, factions break out within the Republic. Some want just political changes or revolutions, and some want to see social and economic changes made as well. So they want to reform society and the economics of France, not just the politics or the political system in France. So these factions emerge and bloody fights and battles break out because of these factions within the Republic. So the citizens are really weary of all this fighting and all this bloodshed, and so they immediately want to get rid of the Republic. So that's what happens. And they bring in Louis Napoleon, who is Napoleon Bonaparte's nephew. So they bring him in and they elect him as president. They wanted a strong president, and they elect him. He actually makes some pretty good reforms, and the people are really happy with him. And so eventually they allow him to become emperor, and he's Napoleon III. So even though this begins with some liberal revolutions, liberal ideas, they end up going back to rule by an emperor again. So that's in France. Next is Austria. In Austria, there is a liberal, his name is Louis Kossuth, and he leads a liberal revolution in Austria. He's actually very successful, and he ends up being able to force Metternich to resign. So Metternich, who has had the age of Metternich, he's really the face of conservatism throughout Europe at this time from 1814 to 1848, is forced to resign during this revolution, this liberal revolution. Unfortunately, though, it only lasts a year, and even though Metternich has resigned, conservatives take back power in Austria again just a year later. Next is Germany. So remember, and you can see this on the map here, Germany after the Congress of Vienna is the German Confederation. So it's 39 independent countries within Germany, but they're kind of loosely tied together in this idea of the German Confederation. Well, in 1848, they try to unify all of Germany. They try to unify all 39 of those countries, and this is the liberal revolution that's taking place, but unfortunately the attempt fails, and so they do not unite all 39 independent German states in 1848. Next is Italy, and Italy is kind of the same thing as Germany here. They revolt against their Austrian rulers, so you can see on the map down here that the Austrian Empire is the big blue spot here, and so Italy is revolting against them, and they're trying to unify because Italy is also broken up into a bunch of independent states at this point in time, and so they're trying to all break free of those Austrian rulers and kind of unite in this liberal revolution, but it also fails. So the results. All of these liberal revolutions that take place in 1848 are defeated. Even if they're temporarily successful, they eventually are defeated, and conservatism returns to Europe. Some of that is about to change, but for the time being, that is what happens. There is one exception to this rule, however, and that is Great Britain. So Great Britain is isolated, and they are able to avoid these liberal revolts or revolutions that take place in 1848. However, Great Britain is kind of also an exception because they have a history, a long-standing history of democratic principles. So you can kind of think back to William and Mary and their glorious revolution, and when they agree that they are going to be a constitutional monarchy. Sorry guys, they're mowing the grass outside of my window. So they agree to be a constitutional monarchy and work with Parliament, and this gives more power to Parliament, who is an elected body of officials by the people. So there's really an expansion of political rights in Great Britain, and so they have a history of more democratic principles there. Also during this time period, Great Britain makes the slave trade within the British Isles illegal, so that's important, and that's a step forward for the rights of individuals. So Great Britain is the exception to these liberal revolutions that were taking place in 1848. That is our video tonight. Tomorrow night we are going to start talking about Italian unification. So not the revolution that took place in 1848, but an actual Italian unification. So see you guys in class tomorrow.